right. Well, good morning. Good afternoon, depending on where you are. It's morning here on the East Coast in the United States. I believe it's about 1 o'clock in London, and further east, it's even later. Today, I want to talk about optics. Um, and I want to look at a number of examples. So we know that there's a difference between fact versus narrative. And if you start having questions, you can start loading them in, and I'll address them as soon as I'm done with this mini lecturette. There's a difference between fact and narrative. And we know that. And when we think about like the news, there are facts embedded in the news, but there's also a narrative that the paper is trying to present, the writer is trying to present. Yesterday, I did this. So I saw on Twitter that somebody had put Scott Ritter. This is great, and it was Scott Ritter investigation, Agent Zelensky, and I'm like, oh dear, I have to watch this. And so I did, and I only covered, and I'm going to put this out today at 2 o'clock. I think I have it set for 2 o'clock. And if you could do something for me, if you watch it, just go, watch it. Oh, everybody watch it at 2 o'clock. It'll help the algorithm. Watch it, like it, whatever. It'll help the algorithm, help it spread. But it was so laden with narrative. There were facts in there, but the facts, like, I could agree on a number of facts, but not what the conclusions were. And so optics are kind of the same thing. So that's two. There's two things here. Go watch that Scott Ritter investigation, Agent Zelensky, and that's going into the exposed category in my playlist. Like the Russian talking points exposed. And man, it's like thing after thing. Like he puts up all these headlines on at one point. He's like, and we know that he's done this, and shows the headlines on there. And it says, and these headlines are disappearing from the internet. One, they're not disappeared. And two, I talked about each headline because I stopped and paused on it and then explained, because I talked about most of them. So that's the narrative as opposed to the facts. The facts we agreed on. Okay, optics are somewhat similar. Optics are not reality, but they're the appearance of reality. And so let's talk about just a few examples, and then we'll get to your questions. Okay, so Prigozhin, the optics of Prigozhin and the coup or the Freedom March or whatever you want to call it, somewhere in between, were terrible. They were terrible. They weren't good for Prigozhin, but they were absolutely terrible for Putin. And only the most jaded pro-Russian supporter can say, well, this made Putin look stronger because he, came out of this successfully. No, there were chinks in the armor that Prigozhin's Freedom March or whatever it was exposed, and that's it was a bad look for Putin. This week we had something interesting with NATO. So Zelensky goes to NATO, and then his words are carried in the NATO conference, in the NATO, like, hey, this is absurd or ridiculous. And what he said, as opposed to what was carried in the news headlines, because news headlines only have so much space, were different things. So what he was talking about was absurd, that we don't even have the invitation to a time. Like, it wasn't just about a time frame, which is what it looked like. And you can't do a time frame, right? You can't just do hey, in 2 years you'll be in. But where is the timeline to get to the invitation that when this is over, we can be in, right? So that way, what Zelensky's concern is, he doesn't want, somebody else negotiating without him. And while NATO has been very faithful, it's still a possibility. So, but the optics were terrible. It made Zelensky look like a whiner. And then there were other headlines where, Ben Wallace said, look, we're not Amazon, right? I mean, we can't just, you don't just come here and we deliver. And there was a small comment in there, and he tried to get around that on the other side of this by, like, look, we're all united and that kind of thing. But after saying something like that, even if it was just an offhanded comment, Trump did this to himself a couple years ago. well, not a couple years ago. It was like 7 years ago, 6 years ago now, with the Charlottesville White Power protest march, where what we remember from that was where he said something like, and there are good people on both sides, an offhanded comment, just like going off script. Now, that is all that anybody ever remembers about that. And now they equate that with that's Trump's position, that he thinks good of white supremacists. Wasn't that at all? Read the whole script. I read it. If you read the whole script, there was just this little departure off context from what he otherwise said. And the rest of it was condemnation of the kinds of, things that, don't do these things. And Trump brought it on himself by and gave himself bad optics, which the with a press that was very hostile to him. Everybody knows that, seized upon. So you got to be careful. And the press, even though they are generally pro Zelensky, still seized upon it, whether they're lazy or whatever else. Worst optics, I think, came from the General Politov, whatever his name was, the general that resigned or was sacked rather this week, and that's really bad. But those optics actually matched. Like, it's bad, but what they did was bad, and so not always do they match, right? Like, it's a bad look to sack this. So, and they could say, well, you shouldn't be talking about the the military chain of command. It's true, he shouldn't have been, and if he did it to himself, that's also bad. But what he said was still true, and until the Russians figure this out, like, look, this is true in life too. You have to take personal responsibility, and if you don't take personal responsibility for things, bad things happen. So they're just not able or willing to take personal responsibility. So that's optics. You see things one way, and that may or may not be the way that things actually work. So that's the end of my little mini lecturette. I'm going to look at your questions and I'll answer anything that you have here. So feel free to lay out as many questions as you have, but try to talk to me rather than crosstalk. So, because I'm not really that swift at this. So I want to get to your questions. I want to answer your questions, but try to keep me on track here as well. Because, yeah, okay. Matt's from it says, in terms of our support for Ukraine, does it make any difference if Putin is seen as strong imperialistic czar or a kleptocratic con man? And if so, how? Yeah, probably an imperialistic czar. That's a great question, Mads. Probably an imperialistic czar is worse than a kleptocratic con man, but I don't know that either is going to hurt our support for Ukraine. Okay, he also says, if we pretend that there's no war, if Ukraine had been a member of EU today, how would that affect Russia and the Russians? Well, yeah, I mean, if Ukraine was a member, of the EU, not NATO, how would that affect them? I don't know that what would affect them. I mean, I can see them going into a non-NATO EU country and doing the exact same thing. Um, Again, a lot of what motivates this is that Ukraine was drifting from the Russian orbit, and rather than try to woo them back properly, we're going to invade you and just take over. And because it kind of worked in Georgia, or in that area in Georgia, and then we got the kind of puppet government there. So let's try that again. This is what irritates me about Vivek. And I posted this thing where he called, and well, not him personally, but his campaign called and said, would you like to, we're on the line with the Vivek campaign, and we're doing a town hall meeting. Would you like to ask a question? And I said, sure, I'd love to ask a question. Asked about Ukraine. A number of people have said that was a recording. I don't think it was, because of the way he answered the very beginning of it, where, oh, well, you're informed, you've done your homework here, and blah blah blah. And so maybe he was tricking me. But even then, the point of this is the message that he wants out about Ukraine. Like, he's already pre-scripted it, and you could tell it was scripted, because like the way that he answered and what he answered and the multi pieces that he answered, and it was scripted. But that's what he wants to be out there. So whether it was live scripted or recorded scripted doesn't really matter. That's his position on it. And I did that video about 3, 4 videos back. Okay. He also says, in which way could Western leaders have stopped this war in Ukraine? I think the issue that troubles me about Vivek is directly to that point, and that is that if you just give in to this guy or a dictator, other dictators or this dictator will continue to do what they're doing, and we don't want that. We absolutely don't want that. But we're just going to declare peace and break the alliance with China, and then you can keep your whatever you stole. Well, who's not going to try to steal it? It's like the nuclear blackmail. If somebody can get away with it, then everybody's going to want a nuke so that they can try to blackmail everybody else. Bad idea. And so they, and what could have stopped it? What could have stopped it was had we had the proper reaction in 2008 and 2014, and we didn't. And so not having this proper reaction now is going to guarantee in 2023 that by 2030, there's going to be some other incident that's going to be like this. That could be worse. Sorry for the ridiculous number of questions, but there's a pile to choose from. No, that's fine. I mean, we're here to talk about questions and answer questions. Ozzy says, in many countries, people convicted of the same offenses as Ritter are denied a passport and internet access. Is there something in the U.S. Constitution which prevents that? Okay, so you're talking probably about his personal life and his he was trying to like solicit a minor youth for sexual something or another. I'm not exactly sure what the details are, but it's bad. It's like, endangering an underage minor, right? And I'm happy to talk about that here. I'm not going to do that in a video where I'm taking on his merits. But here, yeah, like that's bad. We know that's bad. And I'm not trying to say it's not bad by not addressing it. But if I'm going to talk about the merits of his argument, I want to address the merits of his argument. And that's why I separate that. Yeah, no, there's nothing in the Constitution. He would be on a sex offender registry or something along those lines, and service time and whatever else. But there's nothing that would necessarily. The Constitution doesn't do anything with that. The founding fathers weren't thinking that that's going to be like an issue that needs to go in there. Okay, John Hoover says the accidental medic. John Hoover is the accidental medic. He says, question, with all the foreign governments sending military and financial aid to Ukraine, why do I see a tremendous amount of private fundraising and material requests from Ukraine military units? Because, okay, so part of this is on Ukraine but more of this is on us. So when you go back to the Budapest Memorandum, essentially the US, UK, and Russia guaranteed Ukraine's borders. Ironic, but that's what happened. And so they didn't really have a need for a military. Like you could make an argument if you're Canada, like, why are we spending money on the military? Well, and there's a reason for it, and you can see it now. But we're right in the US's backyard. What do we need that for? Well, let's say, and this is not going to happen, but let's say the US was to invade, that would be taking you by surprise, right? So it's kind of like that kind of scenario. But they don't have, or at least they have a pretty robust military right now, and they're getting better and better capabilities, but they didn't have the capability in 2014, so they couldn't really do hardly anything. And since 2014 to 2022, they really built up, but they're still trying to fill in gaps. In fact, Zelensky was in since 2014 spending some of his money to support the Ukrainian military. This is before he ever got into politics. But like, I remember reading about that when I was writing the ebook about him. Okay. Let's see. Isa Two Spirits says, good, insert your local time of the year. Cheryl, up already? It's only 5 a.m. Cheryl, you're hardcore. I mean, I see you all over on the other channels as well, trying to imbibe as much of this as you can. Hello from all over the world, including South Australia and Moscow and London and Germany and all these other places. Wow. Okay. Red 1967 feminine symbol says, do you think, I don't know how I should pronounce your name here, Red. Do you think that it's possible that Putin had Prigozhin do the coup to see where loyalties were in regard to Putin? anything's possible, but I'm not going to chase down that theory because I have no substantial knowledge of this. Like, and I, I'm not going to be the first to break any story, but I hope to be as accurate as possible. And if I'm inaccurate relying on the most reliable sources. Like, I'm not relying on Telegram, Frontline, somebody said somewhere. I'm relying on like things that have been sourced through the press and then trying to triangulate to make sense of it. I see nothing out there that is like that, other than maybe some conspiracy land kind of things. But it's possible. I'm not going to wave that around because possible is not. People run with possible and go, "Ooh, this is what's going to happen." So yesterday, on that, um, so we see a bunch of weapons and machinery turned over to the Russian Ministry of Defense from Wagner from Belarus to the Russian Ministry of Defense. So are they going to invade from the north? It's less likely when you don't have stuff to invade with. So, I mean, that the possibilities seem to go down. Okay, Cheryl says NATO should be grateful to Ukraine for protecting NATO. That's right, and they if you frame it that way, that makes a lot of sense, and I would tend to concur. Ben had a message retracted, so I'm not going to answer that because I don't know what it is. Darren, hey, hi, Darren. It's nice to meet another Darren. Darren H says, we keep hearing about crushing sanctions in Russia, but gee, they seem to live very comfortable life with nice shops, supermarkets, and food. They have massive inflation, Darren, and the ruble has gone from a year ago $1 to 18. Hold on, $1 to 18 cents to now $1 to 1 penny as of yesterday. So, yeah, it's not good for their economy. Somebody popped in a super chat, so I'm going to honor that first, if you don't mind, just because that's really kind of you to encourage me with that. So I want to honor that as well. World War II, the USA used flamethrowers for trench warfare in the jungles of Japan to great effect. Flamethrowers are simple enough to make in Ukraine. Why isn't Ukraine doing it? The best for trench warfare. I don't know enough about the technology, but what I understand is that flamethrowers were kind of useful and kind of not. You got to get up close and personal. They can't throw too terribly far. They can light things on fire, but they're not the greatest technology. But to your point, and this is really important with the point, it's um, Ukrainians have been so incredibly, and I did a video about this just a couple days ago about Ukrainian ingenuity. Ukrainians have been so clever in what they're building and how they're doing it. So I can't answer to your flamethrower thing exactly, but I can say this: like, they're building $10,000 rockets. Like, that's crazy. Like, the Russians are firing $1 million rockets. They're building $10,000 rockets based on the German V2, V1 kind of technology with motors and diesel engines, but it still has a warhead. And the Russians are going to have to shoot down these $10,000 rockets with $100,000 rockets of their own. So they're crazy smart with this kind of thing. And necessity is the mother of invention, and they've been inventing a lot, right? Okay. Greetings from Germany. Like Darren says, we keep hearing about crushing. Oh, I already got that. How do you view the problem with lack of ammunition for Ukraine? It's a problem. It's a problem for the Russians, and it's a problem for the West. And it just means who can provide what sooner. And if you can't use one thing, then maybe you can use another. We don't have the air power that they would like to have. So something else has to displace it. And it's one of those kind of things. So artillery shells, I just read something about how they're creating making their own artillery in various places within Ukraine, and it's not going to be total substitution, but they have to get on a war footing and build artillery enough to support. Part of the meat grinder that this Russian general that was just relieved from duty was complaining about was that they didn't have enough Russian artillery. Now, that's really interesting because we don't think about it from that side, but that's right. They didn't have the artillery, and because they didn't have the artillery, they were sending human wave attacks. That's a terrible way to run a war. But if you don't care if people die, then that's what you do, and that's where they were, and he was complaining about it because this guy was actually a really good leader in the way that he dealt with and took care of his troops. From everything that I've read, he's serving the wrong cause, but he was good in terms of leadership, and that's what led him to bring these issues up. And the people on the top didn't want to hear it, and that's a great thing for you, a bad thing for Russia. Okay. Um, Okay, so how do I view the lack of ammunition? Maybe force the RU into the minefields. I'm not sure how you would do that. Cheryl says Ukraine just wants an invitation so it can have the safety of a waiting room. Yeah, I get that, and I think that's pretty fair. Have you had a chance to look into that new NATO Ukraine Council formed at the last meeting? If so, can you give us any details? I have not. I'm sorry. I've just been chasing down other things, and I haven't seen what that's going to look like. The G7 did guarantee a bunch of things and say we're going to, we're with you to the end. So they got like a consolation prize, but what they really wanted was, yes, you will be in when this happens, or something along those lines, and they didn't even get that, and that leads Zelensky to worry, and understandably so. I mean, if I was in Zelensky's shoes, I'd probably think very much like Zelensky does. Okay. After this war, do you think that Ukraine is more likely to enter NATO or a bilateral security agreement with the U.S.? Well, they already had a bilateral security agreement with the U.S., UK, and Russia, and you see how that went. So I think that they'll enter NATO, assuming that everything goes the way that it needs to go. Assuming that Ukraine wins, which I think is a very likely possibility. Cheryl, where to go? Sorry, I just missed it. I'm not so swift with this kind of thing. Forgive me. Oh, okay. We're still following the same failed policy of appeasement. Yeah, we can't do that. We got to stop doing that. That's totally stupid. Talking Bloke says your video on why NATO makes me sad. What have you had to say about the yellow or orange, or is it peach? I have to say about Putin can't be happy about NATO's progress. I'm not sure that I understand Talking Bloke. What you have to say about the yellow or orange, or is it peach? Please clarify. I just don't recall what that was at 0.450 of my video, but I did the video, so if you can just jog my memory. Hello all from Smyrna, Tennessee. I have been to Smyrna, Tennessee, believe it or not. I worked on a congressional campaign out there years ago. So much for guarantees. That's right. Truven Warlord, what do you make of the increase of anti-Ukrainian sentiment within parts of the GOP? I think they can pull off expelling Muscovy before it becomes a problem, but I just want another perspective. It's actually gone up. So since the coup, GOP sentiment has actually risen pro-Ukraine. And ironically, what you have is with the cluster munitions, the people that were against it were Dems. And that makes sense. I mean, I would expect the Democrats to be more sensitive to that kind of thing. And Republicans traditionally are more hawkish. So what doesn't make sense is the lack of support that has existed for a while in the Republicans. Yeah, it's actually gone up some. So I think as you see Ukraine winning, you'll see some of that America first kind of something move away or reside, or what's the word I'm looking for? Lower a bit, while support for Ukraine, nothing is successful like success. And as Ukraine starts to pick up the pace, I think things will turn a little bit in the GOP. That's just my opinion. This is my gut telling me, and I'm a lifelong Republican, and I pay a lot of attention to what's going on in the Republican world. Like yesterday, so they're out in Iowa because it's a presidential race, and Tucker Carlson is interviewing Pence, and Pence is full-throatedly supporting Ukraine, right? And saying, look, we need to be doing this. We need to be giving them the cluster munitions. Because if it doesn't work out, we're going to be sucked into a greater conflict. And he got some boos from the crowd and some tepid support, but like golf applause, not right? And Tim Scott, that's my guy, right? Tim Scott is a Charleston Southern graduate, and made his announcement there, and he's from Charleston and that kind of thing. And he was saying the same thing, didn't get very much, whatever. So there is that rift, but I think that, again, nothing succeeds like success. Okay, Russia needs 10 years to replace all the equipment lost. Yeah, it's pretty bad what they've. It might be longer than that. Did you see Zelensky's answer to the question about ATACMS at the NATO summit? Yeah, the don't know, right? Do you think ATACMS are finally coming? Well, we'll find out this week, I'm pretty sure. So just hold that thought. Thank you for being a sane conservative professor. I thought that sanity had completely left the conservative movement. You don't know enough conservatives. So people that say that, I always smile when people say that. Like, okay, just get to know like your neighborhood conservative. Now there's Republican. There are people that are insane on all sides. Like there are some pretty insane Democrats as well, and there are some pretty insane Republicans. But like everyone that I know is like me and acts like me. Like not everyone I know. All my closest inner circle friends, like I try to speak to and listen to people on all sides, but the people that I'm closest to are just like me. Like there are conservatives just like me out there that, and so we think and process in the very same way. Uh, so yeah, I wouldn't worry about it. Just get to know some more Republicans. So I mean, conservative Republicans. Darren, yes, I have to drink Coca-Cola, which is imported from Iran. It's bad. Oh, you're talking to somebody else. Sorry. Um, Regtas. Hello. How do I think that this tragedy in Ukraine will end? My opinion is that you cannot win a war against a nation. I think you're right that it's a tragedy. I'm not sure how it's going to end exactly. I think it'll probably be longer than we like. Um, if you're Putin, you want to extend this as much as possible. You don't want to lose it, and you want to just keep it going, because keeping it going is actually a stronger play than whatever could possibly happen badly on the battlefield. So you'd be actually happy, I think, with a South Korea, North Korea kind of split. And I think that's what Putin's hoping for as a consolation prize if he can't have something just, luck into something. Okay, I don't think that. And by the way, I don't think that the Russians are going anywhere. I saw one of the scariest articles. I was actually thinking about doing a video about that I've seen yet. So 10th graders in high school are going to be involved in some patriotic education, which will include 2 types of hand grenades and all kinds of other military preparedness stuff. Yeah, you can see where that's going. They're going to be trying to move them from high school right into the military at a much greater clip. So they're not planning on going anywhere. Okay, good for bunkers, not trenches. John Hoover says, Professor, do you see the BBC report of Wagner troops training Belarusian soldiers? Yeah, I mean, let them do that. I mean, it's the Belarusian army is terrible. So it's better than being on the battlefield. And Lukashenko is going to want to keep security in his own state. I don't think it's going to be that big of a thing. They don't have the equipment to be able to be really active, at least not yet. But I don't see where they're going to get it from. Do you see Perpetua's recent video where they discuss Swedish CV90 IVF? Highly recommended. I have not seen that, but thank you for tipping me off. Hey, from Tel Aviv, want a flamethrower against grenades and a rifle? No, I don't. Prometheus UA says, greetings from Ukraine. I once suggested that you invite the Ukrainian military expert Miklovia Beliklaskov. Your videos with him will improve your understanding of the war in Ukraine. Well, I'm going to highlight that and copy it to put it on my clipboard so that I can try to track this person down. Thank you for that suggestion. I have a question. Eagle Mob says, what about those 500 liquidated in the war? Who take care of them? For each dead, you need at least one person. So yeah, 500,000, 500. I'm not sure how many you're talking about. So 237,000 dead times 2 will need the same amount to take care of or not. Well, okay, you're making assumptions here, Eagle Mob, and I'm going with when I do these, I do the most conservative figure so that I'm least, so I'm not wrong, if that makes sense. The most conservative figure is the US figure. The UK is a little bit more liberal. Ukraine's figure is a lot broader. They might have the most accurate. I just don't know. But I don't want to overinflate potentially. And so that's the method that I take. Okay, but to your greater point, will they need 2 times the people to take care of them or not? Not the way the Russians do it. Like, I think you're thinking like a Westerner. Like, we take care of our dead, we leave no one behind, that kind of thing. And they don't. I mean, the way they value life is very different. Okay, 2020 is, well, sorry, that just skipped out on me here. And okay, so Paul Gilbert, where did that go? I'm sorry here, folks. I'm not the swiftest with this kind of thing. And I keep hitting some button here that is, okay, Paul Gilbert, I don't see that you have a question. Do you have a question with this? I see a super chattishy thing, but every time I click on it, it just, I guess not. Paul, I'm sorry if I'm, technologically not swift enough that you were trying to ask a question too. I will answer your question. I'll remember the name Gilbert and come to answer your question. But the super chat thing just didn't show a question when I clicked on it. Okay. Brian Hancher says Japanese in World War II were not just entrenched, but using extensive tunnel systems. And I'm not saying you're wrong, just different tactical problem. Yeah. And you know what? Actually, when I think about tactical problems and technology, drones are really, like, I did a video on drones about a week or two ago, where I'm trying to remember where that was or which video it was, but the drones that they're using, like, maybe it was in that same video with the Ukrainians are brilliant with the rocket, but the drones, like, they're trying to create 200,000 drones this year in Ukraine, like, to build that. So I mean, that's going to be really, really helpful. Philip Brand, let me see. Sorry, which cities are, sorry, Ali Sialmi, which cities are there still war in? Pretty much any of the occupied areas. Just look at the map, and anything in occupied Russia, they're still fighting. And then they'll be, hammering, like before the NATO conference. They do this by every conference. You go to the EU or NATO or Ramstein or whatever, and the Russians will shell major cities or send rockets on major cities and drones and that kind of thing. So Philip Brand says, is the greater conflict you mentioned not only a question of time, and we in the West would need a little bit more time to prepare considering the Chinese and Russian action plans? I don't think so. I think there's not a fate. There is action and reaction. So how we react can shape the future of what a bad actor might do. I think that's fair. Cheryl says cluster munitions only happened because we ran out of 155 millimeter munitions. That's what they're building, right? By the way, Cheryl, is in-house in Ukraine, is they're creating 155s. But while that's true, it's still also giving them a fairly powerful weapon that gives them capabilities that they didn't have. Ozzy, hi Ozzy. John Hoover says, is it true that the lack of GOP support for Ukraine, or just wanting a true accounting of weapons and funding? Your thoughts? So both are simultaneous, and one looks like the other. That's a really insightful question, John, because it's not just so that if you believe the mainstream narrative skews left, it's not going to have an accurate view of the Republicans to begin with, just because it already has that. But there's differences there in your question. So Republicans simultaneously have lower levels of support, and then there are people that want an accurate accounting that may look like they're a lower level of support, but that's actually just a normal Republicanish kind of thing to do. Like, we're kind of the nerdy accountant types, right? Like hey, who's going to pay for this is a very common refrain in the GOP. Richard Key, so you're rooting for Mike Pence or Tim Scott. I'll take either. I prefer Tim Scott, but I'm in a heartbeat. I would have Mike Pence just as easily. Steve Osborne says, my prof, it's me again. Actually, the best saying is nothing succeeds like a parrot with no teeth. Oh, okay. I can buy that. If Philip Brand says, if not when, soon someone might build the next bigger SAR bomb. Well, that's true. Somebody is always working on something like that. Unfortunately, conservatives like me are in the minority in my party, says Cheryl. And that's true in a sense. It's so it's not, it is and it's not. So it is in the sense that there is a larger coalition that Trump brought into the fold largely that were more progressive than conservative, that is making all the noise. But conservatives are still here going, what happened? When did we become the pro-Russia party? Like, how did that happen? That's not us. And so we're fighting back. Don't worry about that. How much is the industrial war machine to gain from this? I mean, yeah, they're going to gain. But this idea that it's the military industrial complex that's causing this, and there's conspiracy theory kind of stuff out there about that. Oh, and Lavrov was talking about this, the same thing, that's what's going on there. Talking Bloke says, would you, I think it was Lavrov. Was it Lavrov that was talking? It was in RT, but I'm not sure if it was Lavrov. So I might be corrected there. But it was still them saying, well, this is what's causing it. It's the military industrial complex. Talking Bloke says, would like to thank the sponsors of Drask Advert for that soap. Does look, I don't know what we're talking about. Ozzy Buga says, I love the commentary of people who have come together and really care about Ukraine, and nod to Cheryl Waitley. Yeah, so Cheryl is as left as I am right, and that's okay. We all support Ukraine. So let's find those places where we have common interests and work toward our common interests. I think we could get a lot further down the political path if we all just had that kind of attitude. And we're going to disagree on other things. That's okay. We can disagree on other things. Let's use our commonality where we can. Okay, so I just hit something here. Let's see, where am I? Hi, Prof. Liking your great work. I think the Prigozhin photo in a tent is a fake. I think he's just another war criminal rotting in a shallow grave now. Don't know. We won't find out for a while if that's true, but could be. Letting him live seemed like a not that. It seemed to make Putin look weak, and that's like the kiss of death for an authoritarian. Okay. Let's skip down a little bit. So hard to watch the suffering of Ukraine and incremental rise of authoritarianism. Yeah, you're right, Cheryl. Will says, oh no, that's talking to somebody else. Stop talking to other people. I can't make head to Will Soffer says, doesn't mean someone can't be really interested in it though. I don't know what we're talking about. Oz says, oh, where have the GLSDBs gone? What happened to fabrication of the jointing collars? What's the timeline, please? Don't know. I know that they're trying to get them there, but I don't have details about that. American in Ukraine, why Ukraine? This is a small channel that you should go out and check out, by the way. Why Ukraine? What do you think about Marcus and the 47 Brigade? He had a meeting with Zelensky this week after his online complaints. So I don't know much about it except that he had an issue, resigned and stayed, and like put down his rank and then stayed to fight. But I don't know what it is. But like it's a very different thing than what I just described with the Russian military, and the way like he wasn't sacked. He resigned and protest, but then stayed to fight, from what I remember. But I only saw a little bit about that. Okay. Brian Hatcher is talking to somebody else. Prometheus says, I could provide a video where Ukrainian soldiers explain why they do not use flamethrowers. Okay, well, that's good. Greg Watkins, and extremely dangerous for a soldier that has to carry them. Yeah, that was a big thing with flamethrowers. It was a very dangerous thing to have to Gary. Um, Will Soffer says, Professor, I want to apologize for kind of putting you on the spot, asking about, no, that's fine. Asking about my views about the GOP and the radicalization of the party. You can understand why someone would want my view. That's fine. I'm perfectly fine with answering questions about that. I'm probably going to be your best source. Who else are you going to ask? A Democrat? Like, don't do that. Ask, like, if I want to know about what a Democrat thinks, I'm going to ask a Democrat, because that's who has that perspective. I have a perspective of what the Democrat has. I'm one step removed, and when you remove yourself a step or more, then you don't see it clearly. This is why I listen to Vlad about perspective, or even Constantine about perspective, about how Russians think. Why I listen to Anna from Ukraine about how Ukrainians think, or how they're processing or feeling emotion or whatever. That's perfectly fine. I'm happy to answer it. How long will Ukraine be able to sustain the offensive? It's a good question. It depends on if they continue to have the support. So there's a war of attrition going on, and Russia has always thought, we have 3 times the population in a larger country and more in industry, and 3 times to 1 we can war of attrit and whatever, and that seems to have been their plan. More recently, it seems like Ukraine's thinking in those terms, trying to really attrit them quickly to kind of even the odds. But I don't know. That's a good question. It has a lot of variables. Accidental Medic says, based on the narratives I'm getting from Ukraine, Bakhmut and other areas are where the heaviest fighting is. Yeah, there's about 3 pockets where there's the heaviest fighting, and they're making slow progress, but they're making some progress. Why Ukraine says, I haven't had much time to come to your channel lately because I've been in training. Okay, well, that's okay, but you all need to go see Why Ukraine. Eagle Mob, what about press? Like, come on, I don't understand that. An EMP, as Steve G says, an EMP might fire microwaves, but not my car, and anything military, it's all shielded. Does accurate accounting, Marco says, does accurate accounting include material promised but not sent? How about unrealistic pricing of substandard buckets of bolts? Yeah, I don't know enough about that to be able to speak to that. Oh, I just lost my place again. Okay. Yeah, Will Sulfur said, and Tucker kept defending him after. Okay, come on. Prometheus USA says, I'm waiting for the great video from drones that will drop elements of cluster shells, but this will be very effective because they explode in the air. Ukrainian army is MacGyver army. You're very right. They are very MacGyver-like in what they do. So drones potentially dropping that could be very useful, but we'll see. Why Ukraine, asking again, what's your opinion about the issues with Marcus and the 45th? We just talked about that, didn't we? Brian Hatcher, I think that people are misinterpreting the military-industrial complex part. If anything, it's pointed out a weakness. Many of the weapons are made by specific firms, and ramping up production is hard. That is true, but that's actually a better scenario than being government-run, because when you're government-run, your knowledge is capped at your head, right? So if you like, whoever's in charge is that if they're right, fine. If they're wrong, then they've got a significant problem where you have competition in a free market to some degree, or multiple firms creating and coordinating things. I would far prefer the Western system to whatever Russia's trying to do right now. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of authoritarian systems in most ways, and this economic way in particular. Yeah, let me keep going. I don't mind the mispronunciation, but it's Sufer. Oh, Sufer as opposed to Soffer. Okay. I'm Gerdes as opposed to Gerdes or Geroles or Gerdes or whatever. So I get it. It's actually a German name, and I mispronounced my own name because I was sitting next to a German businessman at an academic conference once, and I wrote down my name and said, "How do you pronounce that?" And he said, "Gerdes," like he rolled his R. I can't even pronounce my own name, so I don't complain. John J., I totally agree with you. Being in the middle and actually speaking with each other has become unpopular in both parties. Yeah, it's gotten much more toxic in the last few years. Not unlike World War II, where anyone with a machine shop can retool and make something else but it's like a Singer sewing machine company making pistols. So if we're talking about the weapons that, again, go see that Ukrainian ingenuity video. It's something. They are doing something really remarkable with that. Um, it's just fascinating to watch. In fact, I'm gonna drop the link here. Let me copy this and put this into the chat while I'm thinking about it. You just, if you have, oh, that's Halo. That's what I put on my clipboard earlier. This is, hold on, give me a second. Copy video link. Let's see if I did it right. And there we go. So that's the video, and you'll want to see that. Okay. Never saw a country withdraw support during a war. Flamethrower to Russia. Give me men from Ukraine, 3D printer, and motivation. Yeah, that's right. And the motivation is really important too, and that shouldn't be overlooked. Will Sufer, did I say that right now? Sufer. I don't know if I said that right. You never responded to any questions about it, though. The radicalization of the GOP, why you thought Vivek was a viable candidate. No, I don't think he's a viable candidate. He is a candidate. I don't think he's going to get more than a few percentage points. And I think the more he takes away from Trump. So he's actually good in that sense. I just assumed I wasn't interested in answering. No, I'm happy to answer, but not everybody wants to hear about American politics. But Cheryl says, my whole family went from Reagan conservatives to MAGA and Tucker Carlson's mode gradually. Yeah, there's something weird about some like drinking that Kool-Aid and just going that direction. Yeah. But this is a family fight within the Republican Party that people like me need to fight, not someone like Cheryl. Cheryl is only going to irritate that, right? So Cheryl, I'm not talking smack about you, but so it's kind of like someone says, I hate my sister. I hate my sister. Someone says, I hate my sister. I hate my sister. I hate my sister. I can say that all day long. Not Sherry, if you're listening, I don't hate you. But if I say that, it's one thing. But if the kid down the street says that, now it's on, right? So Cheryl in this scenario would be like the kid down the street. And it's for me to address what's going on within the Republican Party, not someone like her. She'll only inflame it where I can actually like, hey, what are you doing? Like, this isn't who we are. So it's just a different thing. Christian says, asking again, will it affect the U.S. presidential candidate negatively if they go with slogans like support Ukraine and we need to ensure Ukraine's future? A vote for me is like a vote for Ukraine victory. I think a very winning way of approaching this for a Republican would be to say, okay, I understand that some of you don't want to support Ukraine. I certainly get that we should be addressing the issues here. And then go into the Pence-like thing about how this is going to become a wider war. And on top of that, they should say other things so look at the polling in the country. And now they might need to say this through surrogates, but look at the polling within the country. Let's say that you win the primary. Do you have a snowball's chance of winning the general election with this anti-Ukraine position? You don't. You just don't. Okay, and so I think that is a very helpful argument as well. So let's see here. He's not talking about Tucker or Pence. I miss it. I did talk about that, and you did miss it. Cheryl says, I'm as worried about the Republican Party as I am about Orban's Hungary. Richard Key says, are you not concerned that a conservative like yourself could do well in the general, but would never make it through the primary? Yeah, there is something there. It is possible, but I don't think. Yeah, so that's the risk, right? But the risk on the other side is the risk as well. So, I mean, I think you need to appeal to that right now and say, look, I'm not asking you to get away from your conservative principles. I'm asking you to remember Reagan. What would Reagan do? And so that's a very easy thing for me, right? Like when I started looking at this, so when I asked myself that question, it was like I was already there, but it was crystal clear at that point. Why Ukraine said, thanks, Professor. Yes, again, go see Why Ukraine's channel. Go light him up. By the way, if you're still here and you can hit a like so that this can spread, I'd appreciate that. And thank you very much. Prometheus says there seems to be a video in English on Ukrainian YouTube channel investigating why Tucker Carlson loves Russia so much. He has income from Hungary, and Hungary is actually an ally from Russia. Yeah, but there's also ideological things like I I I can kind of understand why some of the more conservative threads through both Hungary and Russia are picked up there because they kind of do like politics are they say politics make strange politics make strange bedfellows, right? Like that's where we are right now. If you're on the left and I'm on the right and we're here on this particular issue, so they have some of that with some issues, but not everything. So like remember that's an authoritarian regime over there. Don't pick up everything. Like uh okay, anyway. Okay, Cornelius says, can a majority, oh crap, I just lost my place again. Cornelius, can not majority, can Marjorie Trader Green block F-16? She doesn't have that power as a single congresswoman. Do you think that Poland will play a larger role in NATO? Yeah, and the EU, and there's going to be a Poland, Baltic, Ukraine bloc in the EU as well after this, and that'll be a counterweight to the way that the EU is currently formed. And I think Germany knows that, and some Germans may be less comfortable with that because the Poles and the Germans haven't always gotten along very well, but they'll work it out. What are your thoughts on Ben Wallace's comments at NATO the other day? I think he realized after he said it that this wasn't maybe the best thing to be saying. If we're talking about the Amazon comments, can you comment on the link between white nationalism and pro-Russian vloggers? No, because I just don't know enough about it. Cheryl says, my brother and I were very close growing up and taking care of my infirm mother. Okay. Why Ukraine says, sorry for asking the same question twice. Is there a delay? And I thought you missed it. Thanks for the shout out. Yeah, no worries. Here's a third shout out. Go watch Why Ukraine. Steven Snipe says U.S. New Jersey coming in late and watching from the beginning. What's up, Union? I'm MAGA, but I support Ukraine. Yeah, and so there are those. Like I used broad brushstrokes when I said populists tend to be like this and conservatives tend to be like this. There are conservatives that are MAGA that are still supporting Ukraine. Like it's a mixed bag, but there are like, so you can't, like, no group is monolithic. You just have to understand that that's the way the world works. 2020 is best. How did Russia put danger to NATO when both sides knew that the war with each other would ultimately end in nuclear anyways? Which is a great repellent for wars. But remember, like the only reason that this is a thing is because Ukraine wasn't in NATO. So they're like, okay, think about, I'm not even going to give the example that should be sufficient. Cheryl Waitley, my first vote was for Reagan. I was very young. I later discovered my own. I'm sorry that you went a different direction. That's very sad to me. White Lightning says no congressman can block F-16s. That's correct. Brian Hatcher says Poland really has impressed me with their support for Ukraine, but the way that they welcome refugees and the way that they've been healing that Poland-Ukraine rift since World War II has been very touching to watch. Reagan would beat Trump to a pulp. Yeah, it would be interesting to see a Reagan in his prime taking on a Trump in his prime. Let's see. Prometheus says, Cornelius Antonius, literally today there was news that the USA has not yet given official permission to the Europeans to train Ukrainian pilots. Yeah, and it's about the flight training is about to start in Romania, so they need to get on the stick with that. Brian Hatcher says, this might be a longer term, but do you think Russians will eventually get pride out of Transnistria? Depends on how things work here. And I lost my place. Okay. Okay, well, I'll pick up wherever I see a question. Okay, so Liz Cheney, Kinzinger, Bill Kristol, Steve Schmidt, Rick Wilson, any old school principled Republicans have left the party now. No, not necessarily. There's a lot of principled conservatives still in there. Professor, what is your opinion on Mersheimer? Not a big fan. Is he still trying to be relevant? Yes. Pence said he fully support Ukraine. Yeah, he was full-throated endorsement of Ukraine, and he makes a very compelling argument. Matt says that no one has the right to accuse Zelensky of being ungrateful. He leads a country fighting for his survival where people die daily. Ben Wallace was misinterpreted, and that's what I meant by optics when we first started, right? And he's tweeted about it. Wallace recognized the optics were bad for what he said. It was a little side comment. It wasn't like the main thrust of his thing, but that's what got picked up. Okay, instead of talking about Trump, isn't Biden making America great right now? Instead of about it like Trump, that's how I see it. I don't like Biden. I never have liked Biden. I don't like almost anything that he has done, except the way that he has post-invasion handled Ukraine. I don't think he was strong enough in trying to prevent it, frankly. But once it happened, I've got to give him some props for standing up, right? But again, I'm not going to agree with Biden naturally, just like Cheryl's not going to agree with me because we're on different places. But I got to give people credit where credit's due, and that's where credit's due. Okay. Supporting the Ukraine, to me, is about humanity. I don't believe in isolationism. I used to be a lefty, but moved closer to the center later on. Okay, yeah, I mean, and those on the left see the humanity there, and that's what's motivating there. Yeah, I don't believe in isolationism either. I mean, I want to be less involved, but there's also a price to leadership, and you've just got to. I mean, if you're going to get the good, you got to take the bad. That's the facts of life. Some of you older folks will get that. Why skip Smolesk question? I don't know that I skipped Smolesk question. If it triggered article, if it triggered Article 5, it would be a game changer for Ukraine. Yeah, you don't want to trigger Article 5 and have a bigger war with all of NATO involved if you can avoid it. You want to tamp this down. Like if you have a campfire that gets out of the way, you want to tamp it down locally rather than let's have a forest fire. We just don't want to do that if we can avoid that. You can't see what's around the corner and what backroom deal Russia might have with China or whatever. You just don't know what you don't know and what could become, and it could become very bad. Cornelia said broadband internet is a must. Greetings from the Netherlands. Greetings. Biden wins. Thing moved on me again. I'm sorry. I'm way behind in the question, so that's why all of the Europe and Baltic states and the U.S. should be the ones saying thank you to people of Ukraine fighting the war for all of us. The Baltics are really full-throatedly supporting as well. I lawfully protested on January 6th on the Capitol due to voter fraud, and I too suspected support Ukraine's complete victory in 1991 borders. Sorry to bust your stereotypes. Yeah, like I said, they're not monolithic. They're really not, right? So there are conservatives and populists and all kinds of whatever that could still be supporting, but in general, that's what I was speaking of. Broadband internet. Oh, there we are. That's a broadband internet. Really appreciate your opinion of Biden. I agree with it. Okay, good. So mad Biden sided with Germany this time and didn't invite Ukraine into the fold. They should have. So it's kind of like in what was it, before 2008 when they said Ukraine and Georgia, you'll have membership. This is kind of what kicked it off somewhere down the line. And at that point, you could see Putin just turned his face against the West. So I think they needed to do something more than the consolation prize that they gave, but they can't give a timeline exactly. They could say, look, we've just agreed. We will admit you on the other side of this war. But in doing that, that gives Putin then every incentive to keep fighting. So I'm sure smarter minds than me are trying to sort this out. Let's see. Little Whiskey Shop. How much is the fear of F-16s won't perform as well as sold? I don't think that's a big fear. Coton, Cheryl says, Coton made great points about why not being isolationist is good for the economy. Hoover Institution lecture 2 days ago. I like Coton, generally speaking, not everything he says, but he's a wealth of insight. He's a professor at Princeton, I think. Hoover Accidental Medic says, telling friends in Ukraine about your channel. Next time in Kyiv, I'm picking up goodies for friends. What a cool, I want a cool UAT. Thinking about you. Absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm a large. Yes. Fixator says Polish government is. Oh, you're talking to somebody else, not talking to me. Richard Key says, how prominent do you think Ukraine will be in the upcoming election season? Do you think so? Ukraine's a really interesting thing because Cheryl, help me about this. Where are the Democrats, or if you're on the left side of the spectrum, where are the where's the left split in the same way that the right is split about Ukraine? Like on what other issues do you have leading candidates that are so split? I don't mean I'm woke and I'm less woke. I don't mean that, but woke and anti-woke, you really don't see on the left, right? And on the right, they're just not woke, right? It's just they're different. They're designed differently because of the underlying assumptions that we have that lead us to different conclusions. But Ukraine really does split the GOP, so it's an odd thing to watch. With all due respect, I'm being naive, says Will Sufer. Yes, conservatives like you exist in the party, but you're a tiny minority. It's not a tiny minority. There's no chance of the righting the GOP ship. I don't think so. Will, are you conservative or populist or something along those lines? Or I'm curious what your background is and why you think that. Okay, I'll search the theory changed. Thanks, Professor. Glory to Ukraine. Okay. Cheryl said, you said progressives rather than populist, not one and the same. I am progressive like FDR, not populist like Carlson and Gabbard. Yeah, I'm sorry if I misspoke. Paul Young says, have you Ronald Reagan waiting? You understand? I have a kitten named Reagan. Like that's how hardcore that way I am. I'll show you a picture of her later on. Woke is a meaningless buzzword. Wokeness and MAGA drove this lifelong Republican away from the party. Yeah, I mean, I understand that people have that kind of reaction sometimes. I'm sure that woke has done the same for some on the left. Serving the electorate doesn't have a lot of serving the electorate doesn't a whole lot of wiggle room. Not sure what that was. I'm a lefty and I hate wokeness. See, there's somebody saying that. Amazed at you own intellect is a prerequisite to being a liberal leftist. I'm not sure I understood that quite exactly. Cornelius, or who was that? Stephen. Amazed at your own. I'm not sure I understand the question. Okay. Richard Key says, do I think Trump will participate in the debates looking for, of course he will. He can't stay away from that kind of thing. Will Sofer, I'm an independent. Okay. So I'm almost to the end of the questions and we've gone for an hour. So if you have any last questions, get them in and we'll be done in like 5 minutes or less. I'm an independent libertarian tending toward fiscal conservative and generally socially progressive. Okay. So yeah, there's really no great home for for someone like you, because you're with this side on that and this side on the other. I think that the libertarians that I know have been most comfortable on the right because their assumptions they at least got to be fully on one side, but libertarians on the left that's an awkward place to be. Let's see here. Will says, I'm not talking about politicians or people in Congress. I'm talking about the base, full stop. The results are quite clear there. And also didn't mention Ukraine at all. Yeah, you You might be right, but I don't think so. I think there's enough conservative, particularly conservative Christians, although there's, Christians supported Trump very heavily as well. So, but I think there is a divide there. And by the way, I'm a libertarian sympathizer. I don't call myself libertarian, but I'd be a free marketeer and all that. Ozzy says, I used to identify as being on a certain side of the political spectrum, but now I'm old. I take each issue individually. Okay. Cheryl says, on the left spectrum, there's a strong interest in human rights, allowing genocide to happen. So far, can't seem to see that when it comes to Ukraine. Yeah, there is. The squad is kind of like that because they're so focused on their agenda. But I don't see any issue that so divides the left like I see Ukraine divide the right. It's a really bizarre thing to me. Okay. I get rid of parties and just vote for who you agree with and stop the division. That's not going to happen because the parties allow people to get elected. So it's unfortunately too powerful for that, or that incentive is too powerful. Will says, no, there's no home for someone like me, but I'm definitely not voting Republican for probably a decade with how things are going. Libertarianism was originally a left position, but a long time ago. Well, not exactly. And libertarian, so a classic liberal would be somewhat what a libertarian is / conservative. So I don't know. We don't need to debate that here. Ukrainian is not. Oh, here's some fun. Robert the Forest says Ukraine is not and will not win this war. America needs to withdraw its support. We should never have been involved to start with. Well, I guess we can just go home then. All right. So it's nice to have a troll. By the way, the trolls are back in force. This is my last comment here. Your trolls are back in force, and post Wagner, like after the Freedom March or whatever that was, the trolls went away, but now they're back. So okay, that's it. I'm gonna leave. Apparently the audio is broken for some people. I don't know. No sound. What happened here? Sound.